After 15 years, my own children, David, Clara, and Samuel, sat me down and, with smiles on their faces, asked me to leave. No anger, just polite dismissal. I simply disappeared, a ghost in their family tree. What came next? Well, let's just say some ghosts don't stay silent forever. Like, share this story and tell us where you're listening from. Your city helps me feel less alone in this chilling tale. Now let me tell you how it all began. Time, they say, heals all wounds. What a quaint, comforting lie that is. Time doesn't heal. It just teaches you how to survive the gaping chasm left behind. It teaches you to put on a mask, to walk through the days as if the world hasn't been ripped from beneath your feet. For me, time was merely a clock ticking down to an inevitable, chilling silence. I often look back at the woman I once was, a ghost of a memory, and wonder if she knew the path laid out for her. She was vibrant, full of dreams, brimming with the kind of boundless energy only youth can possess. All that, every single ounce of it, my youth, my strength, my aspirations, I poured into my children. For David, for Clara, for Samuel. I gave them everything, piece by painstaking piece, until there was nothing left of me. Not for them, no, never for them to take, but for them to have, to thrive, to live. The betrayal wasn't born of anger or a dramatic confrontation. No, that would have been too honest, too human. It was far more insidious, far colder. 15 years after I dedicated every waking moment to their lives, David, Clara, and Samuel sat me down. They looked at me, their faces radiating a placid, almost serene calm, and with smiles that never quite reached their eyes, they asked me to leave. No raised voices, no tears, just a gentle, firm suggestion that my presence was no longer required. It was like being erased, a quiet void where a life once was, and so I vanished. I became a ghost, not in the spectral sense, but in a way far more profound and heartbreaking. I was removed from their photographs. My name whispered less and less until it became a phantom echo in the family tree I had so meticulously nurtured. The matriarch, the mother, the glue, gone, as if I'd never existed. My memory, however, is not so easily deleted. I can still see Arthur, 19 and full of an intoxicating charm that swept me off my feet. I was 19 too, brimming with the promise of a teaching career, clutching my degree like a passport to a bright future. We married quickly, a whirlwind romance that felt predestined, carved into the stars. But destiny, I would learn, has a cruel sense of humor. Soon after Arthur's parents fell ill, their needs all-consuming. My teaching aspirations were quietly shelved. There was no discussion, no real choice. It was simply understood. My dreams, once so vivid, faded into the background, replaced by the hushed responsibilities of caregiving. Then came David, small, perfect, smelling of warmth and new beginnings. As I held him so tiny and vulnerable, I whispered a vow that resonated deep within my soul. Everything I do from now on is for you. It wasn't a sacrifice, it was a promise, a realignment of my entire being. Clara and Samuel followed, 2 more precious lives filling our small house with laughter, chaos, and a love so fierce it swallowed me whole. My textbooks, once my closest companions, were replaced by worn copies of bedtime stories, their pages dog-eared from countless readings. My lesson plans became meal plans. My research papers turned into late-night mending of torn clothes. It was a trade I made willingly, believing I was gaining so much more than I was losing. Arthur, dear Arthur, he saw my struggle, my quiet exhaustion. "You're the glue, Eleanor," he'd say, his voice thick with affection, pulling me into a warm embrace. "This family would fall apart without you." Those words, more than any paycheck, any worldly comfort, fueled me. They made the endless nights, the constant demands, the sheer physical and mental drain, all bearable. They made it meaningful. The years were hard. I remember empty fridges and the gnawing anxiety that came with them. I remember huddling with the children under one blanket, trying to ward off the winter chill when the heating bill was just too much. There were tears, yes, from me, usually in the quiet dark after everyone else was asleep. But there was also joy, so much joy. The sticky hands that reached for mine, the innocent questions, the small triumphs. And then those three simple words whispered sleepily into my ear, or shouted with exuberant glee after a particularly good meal. I love you, Mom. They filled me truly more than any career, any recognition, any amount of money ever could. I built my world around those words, believing them to be the foundation of everything. Arthur, my Arthur, was only 50 when he collapsed. A sudden, brutal heart attack. A thief in the night that stole not just my husband, but the very scaffolding of my existence. One moment we were planning our modest retirement, dreaming of quiet days on the porch. The next, the world had gone silent, echoing with a hollow, unbearable grief. I was a young widow, drift in a sea of unspoken promises and shattered dreams, the glue of our family suddenly without its core. After his death, everything shifted. The very air in our home seemed to thin, the warmth seeping away. The children, grown and scattered, returned for the funeral, but they brought with them a new kind of chill. David, my eldest, arrived first. He was a successful tech entrepreneur now, sharp-suited and sharper-edged, his face etched with a preoccupation that had nothing to do with sorrow. He seemed almost impatient, as if grieving was an inconvenience to his tightly scheduled life. His hug was brief, a perfunctory squeeze, his gaze already drifting over my shoulder. "You'll be okay, Mom," he murmured, his voice flat, even as his thumb scrolled almost imperceptibly on his phone. Clara, my only daughter, came next, her fiancé, a man I'd barely met, by her side. She looked beautiful, poised, a vision of the sophisticated young woman she had become. She held my hand, her grip surprisingly light. "We'll figure this out, Mom," she promised, her eyes avoiding mine, a vague reassurance that offered no real comfort. It was a statement, not a question, a declaration of intent that felt oddly detached, as if her involvement was a formality. And then there was Samuel, my youngest, always the quietest, the most introspective. His silence at the funeral was the most profound. He stood beside me, yes, but it felt like an absence, a gaping void that his physical presence couldn't fill. His hand never sought mine. His eyes never met mine with that familiar, shared understanding we once had. It was as if he too was a ghost, already halfway out the door. They left quickly, their lives pulling them away from the somber house, from the weight of grief. David had an urgent meeting, Clara a flight to catch, Samuel just faded away. I was left alone in the house, a mausoleum now, every corner filled with Arthur's ghost, his laughter, his scent, his presence. I wandered through the rooms, touching his favorite armchair, the books he read, the space where his side of the bed once was. It was a living museum of a love lost, and I was its sole, silent curator. In the days and weeks that followed, I clung to the hope of connection. I kept their rooms meticulously clean, as if they might return at any moment. I sent texts, short messages of love, asking about their day. Replies were sparse, often delayed, sometimes just an emoji, a thumbs up, a heart, impersonal, distant. I refused to let bitterness take root, told myself they were busy, caught up in the exhilarating rush of their burgeoning lives. That's what young people did, wasn't it? They spread their wings. I continued my silent rituals of motherhood. I baked their favorite treats, the recipes memorized from years of practice. David's chocolate chip cookies, Clara's lemon bars, Samuel's oatmeal raisin. I carefully packaged them, adding a handwritten letter filled with updates about my small, quiet life, assurances of my love, and veiled hopes for a visit. I addressed them with care, adding extra postage, sending them out into the world like tiny edible prayers. One day, weeks after sending a package to Clara, it reappeared on my doorstep. A stark brown box, precisely as I had sent it, but now adorned with a bright red sticker. Recipient moved, no forwarding address. The words hit me like a physical blow. Moved, without a word, without telling me. A cold dread began to creep into my heart, a premonition of something far more sinister than simple busyness. I fought it, that creeping doubt. They just forgot, I reasoned. They must have been so swamped. It was an oversight, a momentary lapse. I resisted the growing chill that threatened to freeze my widowed heart. But then the universe delivered the final crushing blow. Scrolling through Facebook one evening, a casual glance turned into a searing agony. There it was, Clara's wedding album. Best day of my life, the caption read. Thank you, Mom and Dad, for making it all happen. My breath hitched in my throat. My daughter, my Clara, married, and I wasn't there. I clicked through the photos, my fingers trembling, my vision blurring. Picture after picture, joyous faces, dancing, laughter. And then I saw her, standing proudly next to Clara, beaming. Her arm linked with my daughter's was a woman I didn't know. Not me, it was her mother-in-law. The woman Clara had thanked as mom. In that devastating moment, the silence, the distance, the return package, it all clicked into place. Clara hadn't forgotten to tell me. Her silence wasn't an oversight. It was her goodbye. It was a deliberate, brutal erasure. The days after Clara's wedding revelation blurred into weeks, then months. Each sunrise brought a fresh wave of that gnawing emptiness, yet I clung to routine like a lifeline. I woke, I ate, I tidied the house that now felt too large for one person, a gaping maw of memories. The mailbox became a source of both dread and a faint, foolish hope. Every day I checked it, half expecting a letter, a card, an explanation. Most days it was just bills and advertisements. Then came another social media update, another shard of my life broadcast for the world to see, but hidden from me. Clara, my Clara, on her honeymoon in Italy. Rome, the Colosseum, the Trevi Fountain, bathed in sunlight. And beneath one photo, a caption that twisted the knife deeper. Mama said, throw a coin in and Rome will always welcome you back, Mama. Mama, not mom, not mummy, but Mama. The intimate, tender endearment I had always reserved for my own mother, and that my children had sometimes used for me. Now, Clara was using it for someone else. Her new mother-in-law, no doubt, the beaming woman from the wedding photos. It was a word that felt like a secret handshake I was no longer privy to, a whisper meant for another ear. The sting was exquisite, a silent scream trapped in my throat. I suppressed it, the burgeoning bitterness, the hot tears that threatened to spill. What good would it do? Guilt wouldn't build bridges. Anger wouldn't mend what was so cruelly broken. I told myself they were still adjusting, still finding their way. They would come around, eventually. Then, one crisp autumn afternoon, David arrived, unannounced. My heart, a weary, battered thing, fluttered with a fleeting, desperate hope. Perhaps he was here to apologize, to bridge the chasm. He stood on my porch, impeccably dressed in a sharp business suit, his phone already to his ear, his expression serious. He barely registered my surprise, simply nodded and walked past me into the living room, still talking into his headset. He looked so much like Arthur then, in his ambition and his focused intensity, yet so utterly unlike him in his emotional detachment. Mom, he finally acknowledged me, pulling off his headset as he sank into Arthur's old armchair. It was the first time I'd heard him say it in months. The sound felt foreign, almost artificial. David, I managed, my voice a little shaky. You didn't call. Is everything all right? Everything's fine, he said, his eyes already scanning the familiar room, as if assessing its market value. Just had a moment between calls. I rushed to the kitchen, my hands trembling slightly as I put the kettle on. I remembered how he loved Earl Grey, strong with just a hint of milk. I brewed it precisely to his liking, poured it into his favorite mug, and brought it to him, along with a plate of the oatmeal raisin cookies I'd made the day before. He glanced at the tea, then at the cookies, but made no move to touch either. Mom, he began, his voice devoid of warmth, all business. He pulled a thick manila envelope from his briefcase and laid it on the coffee table between us. I've been talking to Clara and Samuel. My stomach clenched. Here it was, the other shoe. We think it's time for you to downsize, he continued, the word downsize hanging in the air like a polite execution. This house, the land it sits on, it's prime real estate now. You're sitting on a gold mine, Mom. He gestured vaguely around the room where he'd taken his first steps, where we'd celebrated Christmases and birthdays, where Arthur and I had built a life. If you sold, you'd still have more than enough for a nice condo, something smaller, easier to manage, or maybe assisted living. I stared at him, my mind struggling to process the words. "This is my home, David," I finally whispered, the words barely audible. He met my gaze, his own unwavering. "It's just a place, Mom. A building. Bricks and mortar." "This house is all I have left," I said, my voice thin, catching in my throat. It was the truth. It was all that remained of Arthur, of our life, of the family we had been. David nodded, a curt, dismissive gesture. He didn't argue, didn't try to convince me with sentiment. He just slid the manila envelope across the table. It was thick, filled with papers, legal documents I already knew I wouldn't understand. A pre-drafted agreement, no doubt. The implicit message was clear. Sign. He stood up, collected his briefcase, and strapped his headset back on, already talking to someone else. He didn't say goodbye. He simply walked out, his steps brisk, professional, absorbed in his digital world. He didn't look back, not even once. I watched his car pull out of the driveway, disappearing around the bend, and I was left alone with an untouched cup of tea, a plate of cookies, and an envelope full of papers that promised to erase me even further. After David left, the echoes of his words, "It's just a place," reverberated through the empty house. But it wasn't just a place. It was the last repository of a lifetime, the final testament to a love that had once filled every corner. With his departure, the last fragile thread of my hope snapped. There was nothing left to fight for, no one to convince. I was truly, irrevocably alone. I sat at the kitchen table, the manila envelope still sitting untouched. My hand trembled as I picked up a pen and a piece of paper. Not for them this time, for me. "Dear Eleanor," I wrote, the words feeling alien, as if addressing a stranger. "You've done enough, more than enough. Now it's time to let go." It was a eulogy for the woman I had been, a quiet surrender. I packed a single suitcase. Not much, just the bare essentials. A few changes of clothes, a well-worn Bible, and my most cherished possessions. Arthur's tarnished silver wedding ring, still warm from my finger, and a faded photograph of David, Clara, and Samuel laughing, their arms around each other, taken on a long-ago summer day when their smiles were still genuine and their love for me unquestioning. Everything else, the furniture, the mementos, the years of accumulated life, I left behind. They were no longer mine to protect. Before I left, I found another piece of paper and scribbled a short, simple note, leaving it on the kitchen counter next to David's abandoned Earl Grey. "I love you, always have. Always will, Mom." No accusations, no pleas, just a final, undeniable truth. Then with a quiet click that sealed not just a door, but an entire lifetime, I locked the front door. I didn't cry. There were no tears left, only a profound, chilling silence within me. I just walked away, my footsteps soft on the pavement, leaving behind the only home I had ever truly known. I walked until the house was out of sight, then turned my back on it forever, choosing oblivion over the agony of remaining. I found refuge in a small, nameless town, a place far removed from the bustling life I once knew. Above Agnes's floral shop, there was a small room for rent, smelling perpetually of roses and damp earth. I introduced myself as Ellen Harper, a woman with no past, no ties, just a quiet need for anonymity. Agnes, a woman with kind eyes and gnarled hands, asked no questions, simply offered me a job helping out in the shop. The work was simple, repetitive, grounding, trimming stems, arranging bouquets, sweeping petals from the floor. It was a peaceful life, outwardly, but inside, I was still bleeding, quietly, invisibly. Every Sunday, a ritual began. I would sit by the window in my small room, a new pen and paper before me. I wrote letters, not of anger, but of unwavering love. "If you ever want to find me," I'd write to David, Clara, and Samuel, "I'm right here." I poured out fragments of my new quiet life, hoping to weave a thread, however thin, back to them. I mailed them to their old addresses, the ones etched into my memory, knowing in my heart they might never reach their intended recipients. It was an act of faith, a desperate casting of a message in a bottle into an unforgiving sea. Agnes's grandson, Ethan, a bright-eyed boy of 5, would often visit the shop. He was full of innocent curiosity, a stark contrast to the guarded adults around him. He took to calling me Graham, a beautiful, painful mispronunciation of Grandma. It was a name that both warmed and broke my heart, a constant reminder of the grandchildren I would never know, the role I had been denied. "Do you have kids, Graham?" he once asked, his head tilted, his gaze unwavering. I paused, arranging a bouquet of lilies, a faint smile playing on my lips. "Yes, Ethan," I replied softly, my voice barely a whisper. 3, far away. 2 years passed in this quiet, solitary existence. 2 years without a call, a letter, a sign. The hope I nurtured each Sunday dwindled, becoming a fragile ember. Then, unexpectedly, a letter arrived for Ellen Harper. The handwriting was elegant, unfamiliar. I opened it with a strange sense of trepidation. It was from Beatrice, Clara's mother-in-law. The note was brief, almost clinical, but its words hit me like a physical blow. "Dear Eleanor," it began, somehow knowing my true name, "I recently came across a box of old papers David left behind. Among them, I found a stack of letters addressed to Clara, Samuel, and David himself. It appears Clara never received them, as they were still sealed in the box. I felt you should know." "Clara never got your letters." The sentence echoed in my mind, a horrifying revelation. David. It was David. Not oversight, not busyness. He had deliberately intercepted them. He hadn't just asked me to leave. He had systematically, cruelly, cut off every possible avenue for me to reconnect with my children. He wanted me erased, utterly, completely. The initial heartbreak morphed into a cold, hard knot of realization. This wasn't neglect. This was an act of calculated, insidious betrayal. If you've been with me this far, thank you. This next part, it's where everything truly shifted. Don't go anywhere. And if my story resonates, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Beatrice's letter didn't just reveal a secret, it shattered my perception of reality. The silence, the distance, the feeling of being forgotten. Those were wounds that festered. But David's deliberate interception of my letters, his calculated act of erasure, felt like a betrayal of a magnitude I hadn't imagined possible. It hurt more than any previous silence, a visceral pain that cut deeper than abandonment. It was a cold, calculated move to sever me completely, not just from my children, but from the very possibility of redemption. I moved through the next few days in a fog. One morning, almost instinctively, I found myself arranging a bouquet. Lilies, stark and pure, intertwined with the vibrant, wild cheer of sunflowers. "For someone I used to know," I told Agnes, my voice flat when she asked about the unusual combination. I carried it down to the river that snaked quietly through town, its currents a metaphor for the relentless passage of time. I sat on the bank, the bouquet resting beside me, feeling utterly unmoored. Yet surprisingly, anger was not the dominant emotion. It was a profound sadness, a vast, aching emptiness. I let the wind unravel my silence, whispering prayers and forgotten memories into its indifferent currents. That night, back in my quiet room, I wrote another letter. This one, too, was for David, but it was different. "Dear David," I began, my hands steady, "I know what you did. I know about the letters, and I forgive you." The words felt strange, liberating. You took my chance to be a mother again, to mend what was broken, to simply be there. But you cannot take the love I have for you or for Clara and Samuel. That, my son, is mine alone. I didn't send it. It was enough to simply write it, to release the burden of that final devastating secret. 2 months later, spring bloomed, a riot of color and new life, oblivious to the frost that still lingered in my heart. Ethan, Agnes's grandson, invited me to a school play. He was to be a tree, a small, leafy background character. But his excitement was infectious. I went, sitting quietly in the back, feeling a warmth I hadn't experienced in years as I watched the children stumble through their lines. When Ethan spotted me, his face lit up, and he waved, shouting, "Hi, Graham!" from the stage. Tears pricked my eyes, tears not of sorrow, but of a quiet, unexpected joy. He saw me. He remembered me, and in that moment, it was enough. A few days later, a young woman entered Agnes's shop. She was delicate, with eyes that held a profound sadness. "I need something peaceful," she said, her voice soft. "For my mother, she passed recently." I helped her choose a gentle arrangement of white roses and baby's breath. As I tied the ribbon, she looked at me, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. "You remind me of someone," she said, almost to herself. "Ellen," I replied softly, offering my assumed name. Her eyes widened slightly. "Ellen, that was my grandmother's name." A strange, silent recognition passed between us, a momentary connection across generations and griefs. She smiled, a faint, sad smile, and left with her bouquet. That night, as I prepared for bed, I noticed something slipped under my door. A small, square object. I picked it up, my heart thumping with a sudden, inexplicable anticipation. It was an old, faded photograph. The colors were muted, the edges softened with time, but there was no mistaking it. It was a picture of me, Arthur, and our three young children, their faces bright with innocent joy, a picnic spread before us in a sun-dappled park. On the back, in Arthur's familiar looping script, were two words: "Love is never wasted." My breath caught in my throat. This photo, me say, I had left it in the house. This meant someone had found it. Someone had cared enough to keep it. Someone knew where I was, but who and why now? The return of that cherished image, she, coupled with Arthur's timeless message, shifted something deep within me. It wasn't just a photo, it was a lifeline, a whisper from the past that resonated with the present. It meant someone, somewhere, still held a piece of our shared history, a memory of a love that was, and perhaps still is. In that quiet moment holding the fragile photograph, I felt something new take root. I was reshaped, not by bitterness or resentment, but by a renewed fierce determination. I would choose to love, to cherish the connections that still existed, however tenuous, even if the world and my own children had forgotten how to return it. I would not let my love be wasted. Life as Ellen Harper in the small town had settled into a comfortable rhythm, a quiet anonymity that felt both like a refuge and a kind of self-imposed exile. I embraced the mystery surrounding me, the questions in people's eyes that I never answered. Each Sunday I continued my ritual of writing letters to David, Clara, and Samuel, a silent act of enduring motherhood. They were breadcrumbs, scattered without expectation, perhaps more for my own soul than for any hope of them ever being found or read. The photo of my young family, found under my door, remained a precious enigma, a silent promise that love, indeed, is never wasted. It was a comfort, a whisper of a past that still held meaning for someone. Then, one sun-drenched afternoon, while humming a forgotten tune and carefully arranging a vase of freshly cut daisies in Agnes's shop, the world tilted. A sudden searing pain shot through my head, blinding me. The cheerful yellows and whites of the flowers blurred. The scent of damp earth turned cloying, and the floor rushed up to meet me with alarming speed. I woke to the antiseptic scent of a hospital room, the soft hum of machinery, and the comforting click of knitting needles. Agnes sat beside my bed, her kind face etched with worry, her hands busy with yarn. "Eleanor," she whispered, her voice rough with emotion, "you gave us quite a scare." A doctor, a young man with tired eyes, entered the room a few minutes later. His words were precise, clinical, yet they carried the weight of a death sentence. "Mrs. Harper," he began gently, "we've run some tests. It's stage 4, metastatic. We're talking weeks, maybe a few months at best." My world, already a quiet place, seemed to contract even further, the horizon drawing in. "Do you have anyone we should call?" Agnes asked, her voice trembling. I looked at her, then out the window at the distant, indifferent sky. "No, Agnes," I said, my voice surprisingly calm, almost detached. "There's no one." The truth, stark and unadorned, hung in the air between us. Back in my small room above the floral shop, the diagnosis was a strange catalyst, a desperate urge to leave something behind, a tangible piece of my existence, surged within me. I found an old easel and some paints Agnes kept in the back, remnants of a forgotten hobby. I had never painted before. Not truly, but now, the canvas called to me with an urgency I couldn't ignore. I began. My first painting was of Ethan's tree, strong and green, reaching for the sky. Then the flower shop itself, warm and inviting. Agnes, lost in her knitting, her wise eyes full of unspoken stories. Her old ginger cat, curled by the window, basking in a sunbeam. They were simple, raw, filled with an honest affection. My fourth canvas, however, was different. It was a face, familiar yet agonizingly distant. David, not the cold-suited businessman, but David at 5 years old, a smear of chocolate on his cheek from a stolen treat, his chubby hand clutching a vibrant yellow dandelion, his eyes wide with innocent mischief. He was perfect, untouched by the shadows that would later consume him. Then came Clara, a mischievous sparkle in her eyes, clutching a worn teddy bear. And Samuel, introspective even then, absorbed in building a tower of blocks. I painted them all, each portrait a loving recapture of a moment, freezing them in their innocent, pre-pain years, before life, before I had become so utterly disposable. My walls, once bare, became a gallery of ghosts, a testament to the love that had been, the family that had once thrived. One evening, Agnes came up with a cup of herbal tea. She stopped dead in the doorway, her gaze sweeping over the burgeoning collection. "Eleanor," she whispered, her voice full of awe. "They're beautiful. So much life in them. Are these your family? They look so loved." I traced the outline of David's dandelion with my finger, a soft, wistful smile on my lips. "They were," I replied, the past tense a quiet agony. Agnes simply walked over and wrapped me in a gentle hug, a silent acknowledgement of a pain she couldn't comprehend, but understood. The next morning, driven by an instinct I couldn't explain, I carefully packed 3 of the paintings. David with his dandelion, Clara with her bear, and Samuel with his blocks. I wrapped them meticulously, then attached a small, plain card to each. On it I wrote, "From the woman who still remembers." No name, no return address, just that poignant message. I mailed them anonymously, each one an arrow aimed at a heart I hoped still existed somewhere beneath the layers of their adult lives. A week later, the phone in Agnes's shop rang. It was a small gallery from a nearby city. They had somehow seen my work, perhaps through Agnes sharing a photo with a friend, and were captivated. They wanted to display my paintings, to share them with the world. I agreed, a flicker of something almost akin to excitement stirring within me, but with one firm condition. No names. My art, perhaps, but not me. Not Eleanor, not Ellen Harper. Just the work. It felt like a quiet act of rebellion, a way to be seen without being truly found, a whisper of my existence in a world that had tried so hard to silence me. The gallery exhibition opened with an understated elegance, just as I'd wanted. I didn't attend, preferring to remain a ghost in the wings. But Agnes, dear Agnes, went with her friend Marlene, who often helped at the gallery. Marlene returned, her eyes shining, her voice hushed with awe. "Eleanor," she whispered, pulling up a chair in my small room. "People cried, not just a few, but many. They stood in front of your portraits, your children, and just wept. They said they felt the love, the profound sadness. It was extraordinary. A quiet satisfaction settled over me, a strange balm to the perpetual ache in my heart. My art, born of such private sorrow, had touched strangers. It was a testament to a love that, though unreturned, was never truly wasted. One quiet afternoon, a burst of youthful energy breezed through the shop door. It was Daisy, the young woman who had bought flowers for her deceased mother, now looking much brighter. She walked straight to my easel, where I was working on an unfinished painting of a sunset over the river. She studied the portraits on my wall, her gaze lingering on the vibrant, innocent faces of David, Clara, and Samuel. "They must have been lucky," she murmured, her voice soft, "to have someone love them enough to paint them like this." The words were an innocent arrow, hitting a bullseye in my heart. Lucky indeed. I wondered if they knew just how lucky they once were. Daisy became a frequent visitor, her youthful curiosity a gentle intrusion into my solitary world. She brought her sketchbook, her pencils, and her own brand of quiet enthusiasm. I found myself teaching her. sharing what little I knew about colors, about light and shadow, and perhaps, unknowingly, about absence, how even what's not there can shape the image. Her laughter, bright and clear, began to fill the quiet spaces in my small room, a welcome counterpoint to the hum of my own melancholic thoughts. One afternoon, as she sketched, she looked up, her brow furrowed. "Do you ever miss them?" she asked, her gaze fixed on the painted faces of my children. I paused, my brush still. The truth was a physical ache. "Every day, Daisy," I replied, my voice a soft whisper. "Every single day." My health, which had been steadily declining, took a sharper turn. The dull ache in my side, which I had tried to ignore, became a searing, persistent pain. There was no denying it, no pushing it away. I knew deep down that the time was growing short. I went to the hospital alone. Another doctor, another sterile room, another set of grim-faced pronouncements. "We're beyond intervention now, Mrs. Harper," the doctor said, his words falling like stones into a silent well. "We can only make you comfortable." He paused, flipping through my sparse file. "Do you have any family you'd like us to contact?" I looked at him, my eyes clear, devoid of emotion. "No," I said, the word a definitive period at the end of a long, unwritten sentence. "I don't." Back home, I pulled out my stack of unsent letters, the ones I wrote every Sunday, the breadcrumbs I had scattered into the void. My hand trembled slightly as I added a final poignant line to each. "I'm not asking you to come," I wrote, my voice catching in my throat as I imagined them reading it. "I just want you to know I never stopped waiting." I took the thick bundle of letters to the post office. Sarah, the kind-faced clerk, looked at the unusually large stack, then at me, her eyes full of unspoken understanding. "Final delivery," I told her, a faint, strange smile on my lips. She nodded, her hand gently touching mine across the counter. When I returned to the shop, Daisy was waiting for me, perched on a stool by the window, a small drawing clutched in her hands. She presented it to me, her eyes shining with youthful pride. It was a sketch of me, sitting by my easel, framed by the shop window, a faint, almost ethereal glow around me. "It's beautiful, Daisy," I whispered, truly moved. In that moment, I reached out and hugged her, tightly, a desperate act of letting someone, anyone, truly close. It was a release, a fragile connection that anchored me in a world that had tried so hard to unmoor me. Days later, another call came from the gallery. They wanted to expand the exhibition to showcase my full series of family portraits, not just as art, but as a tribute to motherhood, to the enduring, unwavering power of a mother's love. A flicker of my old self, a spark of defiance and pride ignited within me. "Yes," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "Yes, I agree." It felt like a final, powerful declaration, a silent shout into the void that had tried to consume me. The gallery was a symphony of hushed whispers and soft gasps. I stood quietly, a stranger among strangers, observing the faces of people as they gazed at my art. Tears welled in some eyes, others held hands, a silent acknowledgement of the universal language of love and loss that emanated from the canvases. My painted children, frozen in their perfect innocence, were touching hearts, hearts that weren't their own. It was a surreal experience to be so deeply seen and yet utterly invisible. As the crowd thinned, I stepped outside for a breath of crisp air, and there she was, Clara, my daughter, older now, her face a familiar map of time. She stood a little distance away, her back to me, holding something carefully in her hands. One of my anonymously mailed paintings. My heart constricted, a silent, painful beat. She turned then, as if sensing my presence. Our eyes met across the small distance, a silent chasm of years and unspoken pain. For a moment, the world held its breath. Then, without a word, Clara turned and walked away, disappearing into the twilight. The old Eleanor would have chased, begged for an explanation. But the woman I had become, Ellen Harper, simply watched her go. I understood now that some wounds, some people, needed space, not pursuit. Healing wasn't always about reunion. Sometimes it was about acceptance. The next morning, the scent of coffee and pancakes filled the air. Daisy, my unexpected constant, hummed a cheerful tune in the kitchen. She had started staying over more frequently, her bright presence a comforting anchor in my rapidly shifting reality. After breakfast, she brought out her sketchbook, proudly displaying a series of new portraits she'd been working on. Agnes, Ethan, even a quick charming sketch of me. Then, with a playful glint in her eye, she pulled out something else. My old leather-bound journal. The one filled with my silent Sundays. She'd been reading it. "They don't deserve you," Daisy stated, her young voice firm, her gaze unwavering. The words, so simply put, resonated with a profound truth that reached deep within me. It was a strange kind of liberation, hearing it from someone else, someone innocent and unconnected. Inspired by this newfound clarity, I returned to my easel. This time I painted Clara, not the distant woman I had seen at the gallery, but the child from my memory, her arms wrapped around my neck, her small voice proclaiming, "You're my best friend, Mommy." I poured every ounce of that remembered love, that unquestioning adoration, onto the canvas. And once it was dry, I mailed it, anonymously, as I had done before. A week later, a small typed note arrived, devoid of a return address. Just two words, stark and powerful. I remember too. My fingers traced the letters, a tremor running through me. It was her. Clara. She remembered. Then one afternoon, Agnes arrived with a familiar white box, one I hadn't seen in years. It was a leather-bound album, its cover embossed with the words, "Our Firsts." My breath caught. Inside, nestled among faded baby photos, was a handwritten note. Not typed, but Clara's own familiar script. I didn't know, it read, the ink smudged in places. I didn't see, but I remember now, R. The R was for remembrance, a silent acknowledgement of the name I had chosen for myself in my letters, that album. Our firsts. David's first steps, Clara's first lost tooth, Samuel's first word. Each page unlocked a cascade of sealed memories, images, sounds, feelings that I hadn't dared to access for years. I realized then that memory wasn't a choice. It was a ghost, waiting to be summoned. As I sifted through old keepsakes, a tied bundle of papers fell from a forgotten box. My old unsent letters, the Sunday rituals, and tucked within the string, a small, faded note from Agnes. Found these in the donation box. My heart plummeted. The donation box. The one where Arthur's old books had gone, the books I had allowed David to sort after Arthur's death. It all clicked into place with shattering clarity. David hadn't just intercepted the recent letters. He had systematically, methodically, hidden all of them for years. He had ensured I would disappear without a trace, without a voice. The full extent of his cruelty, his relentless effort to erase me, finally revealed itself. A cold, steely resolve settled in my heart, replacing the lingering sorrow. I picked up the phone, my fingers surprisingly steady. I called the gallery. "I want to add a final piece to the exhibition," I told the curator, my voice clear and firm. A self-portrait. I painted Mother Still. It was a raw, honest image of myself, not the vibrant young woman, not the grieving widow, nor the quiet Ellen Harper. It was me now, etched with the lines of resilience, of betrayal, of unwavering love. My eyes, though tired, held a fierce, undimmed light. My hand, though frail, was still reaching. I placed it in the center of the exhibition, a silent, powerful declaration that the mother, though invisible for so long, still existed. On the final weekend of the exhibition, a quiet figure stood before Mother Still, my self-portrait. It was Samuel. His shoulders shook, and silent tears streamed down his face. "Mom," he whispered, his voice were raw with a grief that mirrored my own. He turned, and for the first time in 15 years, he fell into my arm, holding me tightly. "I'm so sorry. David told us, he told us you didn't want to be found, that you wanted to be left alone." I held him, my own tears finally falling, warm against his hair. "I never stopped loving you, Samuel," I whispered, the truth like a balm on an old wound. He pulled back, his eyes searching mine. "Can we fix it, Mom? Can we really fix this?" I squeezed his hand, a silent promise. "We can try." 2 days later, Clara appeared at my doorstep, a small suitcase by her side. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face pale. "I don't know what to say," she murmured, wringing her hands. I simply opened my arms. You came, I said, and pulled her into a long overdue embrace. She told me about Sophia, her daughter, about wanting Sophia to know her grandmother. It's not too late, I told her, truly believing it for the first time. David remained conspicuously absent, but Clara soon brought Sophia, a bright-eyed whirlwind of a girl. She handed me a crayon drawing, a chaotic swirl of colors depicting a family. That's you, Grandma Ellen, she announced, pointing, and Mommy, and Daddy Noah, and me. And that's my Uncle David. Her innocent inclusion of him, despite his absence, brought a bittersweet smile to my face. It was Noah, Clara's husband, who delivered another piece of the puzzle. He arrived with a sturdy cardboard box filled with old items he'd found in David's storage unit. My favorite teacup, a faded quilt, a collection of Arthur's old books. He kept everything, Eleanor, Noah confirmed, his voice gentle. He never threw any of it away. In that moment, I understood David not as a villain, but as a man consumed by shame, afraid of himself and what he had done. I remembered an old journal entry penned years ago. Today, David told me he hated me. I whispered, no matter what you say, I'll always be your mother. I returned to my easel, my heart overflowing. I painted Sophia, Clara, and Noah, their faces alight with a rediscovered warmth. And then I left a canvas blank, a space for David, a gesture of forgiveness, a door left unlocked for whenever he was ready to walk through. At the final showing, he came. David stood before Mother still, his gaze fixed on the raw, honest image of me. As our eyes met, he flinched, a flicker of pain crossing his face. You came, I said, my voice soft without judgment. He confessed everything, the shame, the fear that had driven him to hide my letters, to erase me. You were scared, I said, reaching for his hand. We're here now. He looked at me, a profound anguish in his eyes. Is it too late, Mom? No, David, I replied, my voice unwavering. You're still my son. We hugged then, the first real embrace in 15 agonizing years, a silent unraveling of decades of pain. He walked me home, and we shared tea in the quiet living room, a fragile peace settling between us. He pulled out a battered notebook, filled with his own unsent, missing you notes scribbled over the years. He showed me an old photograph, a faded snapshot of us all, young and joyful. Best day ever, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Mom bought us ice cream before dinner. I finished David's portrait that week, painting him not as a child, but as the complex man he was, finally seeing the fear beneath the facade. Agnes stood watching, a knowing smile on her face. You've forgiven him, she stated, not asked. I had to, I replied, the truth simple and profound. It was the only way to come home. Clara, Sophia, and Noah came, and soon my calendar, once empty, felt delightfully full. I looked at my reflection in the window, a faint smiling on my lips. You made it back, I whispered to the silver-haired woman looking back at me. I completed Mother still, not as a solitary figure, but with the empty chairs now filled with the spectral images of my family, Daisy and Agnes, all gathered around me. The cough, however, deepened. One morning, a streak of blood stained my handkerchief. The doctor confirmed it. Weeks, not months. I kept it secret, cherishing every moment. Daisy gave me a new drawing, this one of my full art exhibition. You gave me more than art, Graham, she said, her voice full of adolescent wisdom. You gave me a story. My eyes welling up met hers, and you, my dear, gave me a reason to keep telling mine. I wrote final letters to everyone, to Agnes, to Daisy, and to Clara, Noah, and Sophia, and to David. You broke my heart, I wrote to him, and you helped heal it. Thank you for finding your way back. My last week was a beautiful blur of visits. Agnes, always there. Clara, Noah, and Benjamin, now a regular presence, bringing Sophia, whose innocent questions pierced the fear. Are you dying, Grandma Ellen? She asked one afternoon, her small hand stroking my cheek. Yes, sweet girl, I whispered, holding her close. It's okay, she replied, her wisdom far beyond her years. You'll still be here, just different. Benjamin sat beside me, his eyes wet with unshed tears, unable to say goodbye. You already did, I told him, my voice soft. And now you've come back to say hello. But one last time, my family took me to the gallery, to stand before my art, before mother still. I looked at their faces, etched with love and loss, and a deep peace settled over me. I was angry, I told them, my voice surprisingly strong. I was hurt, but I never stopped loving you. That night, surrounded by Clara, Daisy, and Agnes, the gentle scent of fresh roses from the shop filling my small room, Eleanor Vance, the invisible mother, finally passed peacefully. My funeral was small, just as I would have wanted, my ashes scattered by the river where I had sought solace so many times. But my story didn't end there. The gallery established the Forgotten Mother collection, with Daisy, now a budding artist herself, as its curator. Agnes, in a tribute that touched my heart from beyond, renamed her shop Ellen's Garden. Noah and Clara, inspired by my unwavering love, adopted a son, whom they named Arthur. Clara framed the last letter I wrote her, keeping it on her bedside table. And David, my complicated, redeemed son, finally finished my blank painting. He painted a serene garden, a quiet place, and beneath it, in his own hand, he signed it, "For the woman who never stopped waiting." They said time heals all wounds, but as Eleanor learned, time only teaches you how to live with them. Her story is a testament to a mother's boundless sacrifice, her youth, her strength, her very dreams poured into David, Clara, and Samuel, only to be met not with anger, but with a smile as they asked her to leave, a betrayal that cut deeper than any rage. For 15 years she vanished, a ghost in her own family tree, her silence a profound ache. Yet life, in its cruel and beautiful way, did circle back. Through her art, a final desperate act of remembrance, her children finally found her. But the truth they discovered, of hidden letters and unspoken love, came as time. The very commodity they thought they had was already running out. This isn't a story about revenge, a story. It's a testament to how some absences echo louder than any presence, and how an unwavering love, even when hidden or denied, can ultimately lead to forgiveness and an unexpected, beautiful homecoming. Eleanor's legacy, painted into every canvas and whispered in every remembered name, proved that a mother's heart can endure, forgive, and find peace, even at the very end. Her love was never wasted.